The wind rattled the walls of a half-collapsed barn when a towering widow stepped inside her shadow, spilling across the dirt floor. She didn't waste a second on pleasantries. "I need a husband, and you need a strong daughter who can survive this land." Caleb Rose froze the shovel slipping from his hands. No one had spoken to him like that in years, maybe ever. She was Maeve Dawson, a woman who had buried more than her share of loved ones and outlasted every storm the West could throw at her. He was a man with nothing left but calloused hands, a broken past, and a heart too used to disappointment. Their deal was simple: no flowers, no vows, no illusions. Just work, shelter, and maybe one day a child strong enough to outlive them both. But the West is never kind for long. When a figure from Maeve's past returned under the cloak of night bringing fire gun metal and the smell of burning wood, Caleb had to make a choice. Keep running like he always had, or stand his ground for a woman he wasn't sure he loved, but knew he could never afford to lose. What happened after that night would not only bind their fates, but set in motion a story that would change the destiny of a little girl who had yet to take her first breath. The wind was sharp that morning, pulling at the loose boards of Caleb Rowe's half-collapsed barn. He stood in the mud mending the roof with hands cracked from frost and years of disappointment. Somewhere beyond the ridge, coyotes sang to a pale winter moon. He was so deep in his work that he didn't hear the hoofbeats until they stopped right behind him. A shadow fell across him. Maeve Dawson, tall, broad-shouldered, her coat sweeping low like a cloak, sat astride a dapple gray mare. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds, studied him with quiet calculation. "I need a husband," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a final verdict. "And you need a strong daughter." The hammer slipped from Caleb's fingers, hitting the mud with a dull thud. Maeve didn't smile. "Not for love," she added. "Not for charm. For survival." She swung off the saddle boots sinking into the earth and handed him a folded paper. A contract. No flowers, no sweet words. Just work, shelter, food, and maybe one day a girl strong enough to stand when we're both gone. He stared at the paper, his heartbeat slowing to match the stillness between them. She turned without waiting for an answer, her mare's hooves splashing through a shallow puddle. "Sunsets in 4 hours," she called over her shoulder. "That's how long you have." Caleb stood in the cold, the paper heavy in his hand. He'd thought his life was nearly over. But sometimes the end was only where the next chapter began. By sundown, Caleb Rowe had walked the length of Maeve Dawson's ranch twice. The land was broad and wind-bitten, the fences patched in more places than they stood straight. But there was a quiet dignity to it, like a woman who'd been through too much to bother with showy dresses. Maeve stood on the porch when he approached, her arms folded against the cold. Behind her, the stone house rose solid and unyielding smoke curling from the chimney in thin, steady lines. "You sign it?" she asked without preamble. He held out the folded paper. "I did." She didn't take it. Instead, her eyes searched him, pausing on the set of his jaw, the way his shoulders still carried weight that had nothing to do with farm work. "You still got a reason to live?" she asked, her voice calm but cutting. Caleb swallowed. "I've got a reason to stay," he said finally. She gave a small nod as if that was the only answer she needed. "Then we start in the morning." They married 2 days later. No flowers, no crowd, just a rusted horseshoe nailed to the post above the front door and a preacher who owed Maeve a debt. She wore a deep green coat instead of a dress. He wore his only clean shirt. The first night, Caleb laid a blanket on the floor without being told. She didn't ask why, and he didn't explain some distances weren't meant to be closed too soon. Work began at dawn, fixing fences, hauling wood, repairing the roof before the snow came. They spoke little, but when they did, it was always plain and true. One evening, while sharpening his axe by lantern light, Caleb asked quietly, "Why a daughter?" Maeve's eyes softened just a little. "Because the world told me to shrink. I want to teach a girl to stand tall." In the silence that followed, something unspoken began to take root between them. And what happens when someone tries to cut down what they're building together? It happened on the 12th morning. The wind came sharp off the ridge, carrying the scent of trouble, before the sound of hooves reached the yard. Maeve Dawson was splitting kindling when Caleb Rowe stepped out of the barn, shovel in hand. A rider was cutting across the pasture, tall in the saddle, smug, in the way only a man certain of his welcome could be. It was Silas Carrick, her late husband's cousin, rich from other people's misfortune, eyes too quick to find weakness. He reined up in the yard like he owned it. Well, Silas drawled, his gaze sliding from Maeve to Caleb. Didn't think you'd trade your pride for a pair of calloused hands. Maeve's grip tightened on the axe handle. You've got a short ride home ahead of you. Silas smirked, ignoring her. This your new hired help? Or his eyes caught the paper tacked beside the door. Their marriage contract. Guess you're playing house. Caleb moved without thinking, placing himself between them. You should leave. Silas leaned in his saddle. Careful, boy. You're swinging above your weight. The air thickened, brittle as ice about to crack. Maeve's voice cut through it. 10 seconds. Silas didn't budge until Caleb took a slow step forward, shovel balanced loose in his hands like it belonged there for more than digging. Something in that quiet stance made Silas's smile falter. He turned his horse without another word, but not without a final glance that promised he'd be back. When the dust settled, Maeve didn't thank him. She just studied him with those storm-gray eyes and said, You meant it. I don't say things I don't mean, Caleb replied. But later that night, lying on the floor staring at the dark ceiling, he wondered if he'd just stepped into a fight he wasn't sure he could win, and whether walking away was even an option anymore. And what if this fight was about more than land, but about the one thing neither of them knew they could lose? The trouble didn't come all at once. It leaked into their days like water through a cracked roof. A fence post cut clean with a saw, a sack of feed slashed open and left to rot in the rain. The livestock restless at night as if they could smell fear in the air. Maeve Dawson worked like she always had, chopping wood, hauling water, mending with a needle or a hammer. But Caleb Rowe noticed she checked the ridgeline more often now. He noticed, too, that she had started sleeping with the rifle leaning by the bed. One afternoon while she was in town, Caleb found a note pinned to the barn door. This land will never be yours. No name, no signature. But he didn't need one. When Maeve came back, Caleb didn't tell her. He burned the note in the stove, the edges curling to black, and shoveled the ashes deep. This wasn't her fight alone, and maybe he could end it before it reached her. That night the first frost came. He heard her moving in her room, then the creak of the door. She crossed the floor without a word and set down an extra blanket. You're not sleeping on the floor tonight, she said simply. He hesitated. Why now? Because I need a man in this house who knows when to stand guard. Her voice wasn't soft, but it carried something warmer than thanks. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Caleb felt the walls of the stone house bend a little enough to let him in. The wind howled outside, but inside there was the sound of two people breathing in the same rhythm and the quiet understanding that neither was alone anymore. But what happens when the storm outside finally knocks at their door? It came on a moonless night. Caleb woke to the faint smell of smoke. Not the sweet scent of firewood, but the acrid bite of something burning where it shouldn't. He was on his feet before his mind fully caught up, grabbing his boots and the shotgun by the door. Outside, the south fence glowed orange. Flames danced along the dry grass, spreading toward the barn. Maeve, he shouted. She was already there, barefoot in her nightdress, a bucket in one hand, a rifle in the other. The firelight caught her hair, turning it to molten copper, her eyes fierce as a hawk's. Stay back, she ordered. But Caleb didn't listen. Together they beat at the flames with wet sacks, the smoke choking their lungs. Over the crackle of fire he heard hoofbeats too slow, too deliberate to be a passing traveler. From the darkness a figure emerged on horseback, tall in the saddle coat, hanging like the shadow of a bad memory. You think this land's yours, the man called out, voice slithering between the trees. Maeve straightened rifle at her shoulder. It's mine because I keep it. Now ride on before you don't. The man laughed, but Caleb could hear the threat in it. We'll see how long you keep it when you've got more than fences to lose. Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark. The fire was out, but the smell lingered. So did the look in Maeve's eyes, not fear, but something heavier. Caleb wanted to ask who that man was, but the way she gripped the rifle told him she wasn't ready to say. When the enemy has a face but no name, how do you prepare for the next attack? The next week passed in a strange quiet. Maeve spoke less than usual, her gaze often fixed on the horizon, as if waiting for something to appear. Caleb kept busy mending fences, checking traps, cleaning the rifle twice a day. The silence between them wasn't cold, but it was taut like a rope holding back a flood. On the seventh night the flood came. It was near midnight when the dogs started barking sharp and urgent. Caleb was at the window in an instant. A lantern bobbed in the darkness, then another. 3 figures moved toward the barn, their steps quick and deliberate. Caleb pulled on his coat, grabbed the shotgun, and turned to Maeve. She was already by the door holding a second rifle. "No talk," she said, her voice low but steady. We moved together. They slipped out into the cold. The air was still, every sound magnified, the crunch of frost under their boots, the faint creak of leather straps, the breathing of men who didn't belong here. Caleb fired first, a warning shot into the dirt at their feet. "Name yourselves." One man dropped the lantern, but the largest stepped forward, grinning through the shadows. "Name don't matter. Message does." Before Caleb could respond, Maeve's voice cut through the night. "Tell your boss this is the last warning he'll ever get." The man laughed, right until Maeve's shot rang out, splintering the post beside his head. He stumbled back, the cocky tilt of his shoulders gone. Something in Caleb shifted then. The fear he'd carried since he lost everything burned away, replaced by something sharper: protection, not just for the land, but for the woman standing beside him. They held their ground until the intruders fled, leaving only the smell of gunpowder and the hiss of their own breath in the cold air. Maeve lowered her rifle, meeting Caleb's gaze. "You're not afraid anymore," she said. "I can't be," he replied. "Not if I'm staying." But staying means facing a past Maeve has never spoken of, and a truth that could change everything. Morning came slow after the gunfire. A pale sun rose over the frost-bitten fields, and for the first time since Caleb had arrived, Maeve brewed coffee for 2 without saying a word. They sat on the porch, steaming mugs in hand, letting the quiet do its work. Caleb broke it first. "They'll be back." Maeve nodded. "They always come back when they think you've got something worth taking." She looked out over the land, her voice softer. "I learned that the hard way. My first husband, he fought for this ranch until it killed him, and I fought for it after. Alone." She turned to him, then her eyes searching his face. "But you stood last night like you'd been here all your life." Caleb's fingers tightened around his mug. "Because this feels more like home than anywhere I've been." Her mouth curved barely, but it was there. "Then maybe it's time we build something more than fences and firewood." The weeks that followed carried a different kind of work. Repairs on the barn roof turned into planting early spring crops. Nights by the fire became longer, filled with stories about the people they'd lost and the dreams they'd never dared speak aloud. The danger never truly left, but the fear did. And in its place grew something stubborn, like wildflowers pushing through dry soil: love, not rushed, not flashy, but strong enough to weather the wind. One evening, Caleb found Maeve standing by the north gate, looking out over the hills. He stepped beside her, their shoulders brushing. "You still want that daughter?" he asked. Maeve's eyes softened. "I want a life that outlives both of us. A daughter would be a good start." Caleb smiled. "Then I guess we better get to it." The sun dipped low, casting the land in gold. They stood there until the light was gone, the cold creeping in, neither moving, because, for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something to run from. It felt like something to run toward. But the West has a way of testing every dream, and theirs will be no exception. Want to hear what comes next? Out on the prairie, time moves slow, but it never stands still. Caleb and Maeve's life was never about grand gestures. It was built in the quiet hours between sunrise and supper, in the way they mended fences side by side, in the silence they shared when words would have been too small, in the steady choice, day after day, to stay. And maybe that's the lesson worth carrying. Love isn't always lightning. Sometimes it's the slow kind, the kind that takes root in stubborn ground and grows stronger through every storm. We all get our share of heartbreak, losses we thought we'd never recover from. But somewhere ahead, there might be a hand that doesn't let go. A voice that says, "I'm here. I'll stay." Maeve once told Caleb she wanted a daughter strong enough to outlive them both. What she gave the world was more than that. She gave it proof that resilience can be inherited, and that gentleness can be as mighty as any gun. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your own battles or the people who stood by you when the sky was falling, don't let it end here. Subscribe to None Wild West. Sega, share it with someone who needs hope, and tell us in the comments, do you want to see what happened in the years after Maeve's promise, or hear more tales of love found in the unlikeliest places, the prairies full of stories? And we'd love to ride through them with you.